It's complete and utter domination. It is to use the anti-Semitism task force as an entry point into eroding all the constitutional protections that are given to every citizen and non-citizen alike. Once they drop due process, and once they drop the non-citizens are not protected by due process or any laws whatsoever, the dismantling of constitutional law. I kind of want to watch this as well because I feel like this will be instructive. Maybe we'll see some analogs in this.
In a step-by-step process, the National Socialist government dismantled constitutional law, usurped justice, and created a lethal totalitarian system that soon engulfed Germany and all of Europe. Redefining the nation as a pure political and biological organism, the Nazi government imposed legislation that reinforced its ideological program in all aspects of German life, with a focus on race, business, religion, and medicine.
Adolf Hitler is dead. He is dead, and how he died, the world little cares. For Hitler's death, millions have prayed, and millions are now thankful for justice. 1920, Hitler began. He was considered just a joke then, a raving crackpot.
Who else was considered just a joke when they initially ran for office? You know, telegenic man who was also zesty, just like young Adolf.
At the dawn of the National Socialist Party in Munich in 1923, a little-known Austrian political upstart by the name of Adolf Hitler naively attempted to overthrow the Weimar government of President Friedrich Ebert. Historically, the Bavarian beer...
Sad to see people glad that somebody died. Guys, it's really messed up that everyone is celebrating the death of Adolf Hitler. It's really wow. So much for the tolerant left once again. He had a wife, okay? That's a person who had a family, all right?
The hall served as a locale of camaraderie and occasional ideological meetings.
The beer hall which took place in November of 1923, the Weimar Republic, which started out in 1920, was in crisis. Certainly the Weimar Republic had all kinds of obstacles to try to overcome. Its leaders were seen as responsible for Germany's surrender in World War I, which no one in Germany expected. They were also seen as responsible for the Versailles Treaty, which all Germans felt was incredibly unfair, even though both the surrender and the need to sign that treaty were really dictated by the generals, who felt that Germany could not sustain further military action.
On November 8th, with 600 stormtroopers led by Ernst Röhm, Hitler descended upon the Bürgerbräu Keller and shouted out, "The national revolution has broken out. The hall is surrounded." After several speeches by putsch leaders,
Americans got real horny when they heard the term burger. They got, oh my God, all the Amerifats in the chat rising up. They're like, man, what's going on here? These guys, did they have some good ideas? I don't get it. I don't get it. They said burger. I love burger.
Hitler left, wrongly believing the revolution had begun.
If you love history, then you will love History Hit, our extensive library of documents.
Having created a political movement out of what was a very small German Workers' Party, Adolf Hitler, inspired by what Benito Mussolini had done in Italy, where he had been able to organize a march on Rome, which put him in a position of power, felt that he could do the same thing. Now, in his case, he had to start from Munich in Bavaria, which is where the Nazi Party had begun and built itself up. And his plan was twofold. He was going to coerce the leaders of Munich and Bavaria into moving out of his way, and he was then going to march on Berlin.
At 11 a.m. on November 9th, Hitler and his followers attempted to take over Munich.
Why is it always men who want to be a tyrant? I mean, there were girl bosses, you know. Margaret Thatcher comes to mind.
Public buildings.
Burgles, thank you for the 100 gifted subs. Oh my God. Burgles. We got burgers left and right, dude.
Police
Everybody.
and army alerted to the party's actions upon the marchers. This left 16 martyrs whose blood soaked the swastika banner of the newly formed party.
In 1923, there was a great deal of economic turmoil in Germany, and Hitler decided to seize the occasion to try to dismantle the democratic process in Germany and essentially establish a dictatorship. The interesting part of the beer hall putsch is that the putsch itself was so poorly disorganized that he never left the city limits, so that he ended up being tried in a local court. Had he made it outside of the city limits or even on his way to Berlin, he could have been tried for treason in the national court and in fact have faced a death sentence.
Landsberg Prison, where Hitler wrote his credo of hate during his imprisonment in 1924, following the unsuccessful beer hall putsch. This was a hallowed shrine to officials, but to American GIs, it's just a jail that Hitler never should have left.
Although Hitler was sentenced to 5 years in Landsberg prison, he was imprisoned less than 9 months, during which time he continued to build his party network and dictate his blueprint for the party program. Mein Kampf provided the seminal ideas for the party's attack on Jews and communists, based upon political and racial laws.
Once Hitler realized that he wasn't going to be able to take power by force, he decided he had to use the political processes to attain power. And he manages to build the most successful political party in Weimar Germany and become the most successful leader. And you know, it's amazing because up until the elections of 1930, it doesn't look like he's getting anywhere. He had this idea, build it and they will come, that if he created the infrastructure for a wide-scale political movement, the opportunity would come along. He recruits, he develops propaganda techniques, he learns to use technology, he recruits a successful group of lieutenants. And when the Great Depression strikes, and once again the Weimar Republic is vulnerable, it is Hitler and they're in this position to capitalize on that and move to power. But he had always said that he was going to use the Constitution, and he was going to use the rules of the Republic to destroy the Republic. Certainly the Reichstag fire, which occurs in February of 1933, helps him.
Chamber-wide deputies meet in Berlin Parliament is destroyed as a result of communist plot. Reichstag is gutted by red incendiaries.
Here you see the Reichstag, the German House of Parliament in Berlin, which has been seriously destroyed by fire.
Notice, dude, come on, I nailed that. I nailed that.
The Reichstagsfire was essentially the 9/11 of Germany. Adolf Hitler had been chancellor of the country for less than a month. There were crucial national elections a week away. And suddenly, this very symbol of German democratic process goes up in flames in an arson attack. The Nazis exploited this event to great effect. The Hitler government immediately blames the communists for this, and the next day Hitler approaches the president and he says, we need to suspend civil liberties. Hindenburg was hesitant, but ultimately...
Yeah, you gotta do it, man. You just gotta do it, you know? Because it's just, you gotta do it because these scary communists, dude, they're so violent, so dangerous, so scary. So scary.
ultimately signed, and that essentially was the first major step in the dismantling of the democratic system. In the atmosphere that existed at that point, a lot of Germans were willing to sacrifice certain liberties for the sake of national security. And once again, I think, given what the United States went through after 9/11, I think one can understand that. And I'm not saying that the dynamics or even the situation was the same, but it can, if one wants to try to imagine what it was like in Germany at that point. Germany changed with the seizure of power in January 33, dramatically, but not immediately. It was actually an extended process that the Germans called the Gleichschaltungsprozess.
Huh. So it wasn't like erosion, constitutional erosion. It wasn't overnight. And it seems like there was a lot of liberal capitulation along the way because they were too busy fighting the common enemy. Why is this hard going to them? Yeah, a lot of Tesla lovers over here, a lot of Elon Musk fans over here, just doing "my heart goes out to you" over and over again, it seems.
By labeling the Reichstag fire as a terrorist attack by the communists, Hitler convinced President Paul von Hindenburg to suspend all civil liberties.
Hindenburg did not like Hitler. He could not even stand to be in the same room with the man, but the political constellations of things were such that he appointed Hitler as chancellor. Hitler then, along with the other...
Okay, this documentary is kind of wild in the way that it covers this process, because like the entire point that I wanted to arrive at, the entire thing that I wanted to drive home here was this, like him doing this, the capitulation from liberal opposition. And it's really fucking annoying that they just like kind of overlooked that. They just glanced over like, oh, he just hated him, but also he just decided to give him all the power. It is the compromise here that is a problem. And I think that many of these like mainstream documentaries and the way that people learn about this stuff doesn't actually feature this aspect of it. Like, this is just completely secondary, but it plays a formative role.
The Nazis set about systematically dismantling the various pieces of democratic process. Some of it through legal means, some of it just subverting the system and ignoring certain laws.
The first major step in overthrowing the justice system occurred with the suspension of all civil liberties and the installation of protective custody, or Schutzhaft.
What happens in the enabling law is by this time, the Communist Party, as a result of the Reichstag fire, had been declared illegal. And that eliminates a powerful bloc of anti-Nazis from the Reichstag. At this point, Hitler goes to the Reichstag and asks for a 4-year dictatorial regime, which would suspend most civil liberties and virtually create a state of almost permanent emergency powers.
At the Kroll Opera House in March of 1933, Hitler proposed the law for removing the distress of Volk and Reich. To keep the Volk secure, the communist ideological enemies were rounded up and imprisoned.
Hier wird ein Gesetz alles Handeln bestimmen. Das Volk lebt nicht für die Wirtschaft und die Wirtschaft existiert nicht für das Kapital, sondern das Kapital dient der Wirtschaft und die Wirtschaft dem Volk.
One of the pro-communist anti-Nazi lawyers caught in the web was Hans Littin, who had defended communists against the wrath of violent Nazis, even daring to question Hitler on the stand for 3 hours in a 1931 trial. Hitler never forgot what he viewed as humiliation at the hands of Littin, and eventually deemed the prominent attorney an enemy of the state. Sent to a concentration camp, this honorable half-Jewish attorney paid for his integrity.
Bro, you know what's kind of interesting about this, by the way? There's another parallel here where all the trials that took place, Donald Trump is quite literally currently singling out law firms that played a role in all of the trials that took place against him right now as we speak. And from what I understand, some of these law firms are doing the exact same thing that Columbia University did, the exact same thing that fucking Harvard did, and they are straight up giving in to whatever his demands are, saying they'll do pro bono work for Trump and the administration, shit like that, ahead of time because they're fearful that they might get prosecuted. So instead of putting up a fight, they're folding ahead of time without any sort of pushback whatsoever. Just like Columbia did, and just like Harvard recently did as well. It's crazy that it's happening in virtually identical terms. And sorry, hold on, let me get this chicken breast in here. And it feels like it's worse than last time, because at least in Nazi Germany, in this entire process, there were 800,000 Germans that were arrested for resisting against the government. Now, many of those Germans were obviously, you know, Jews, communists, socialists, and whatnot. And many of them were arrested specifically for the claim of resisting against the Nazi government, but they were, you know, falsely branded as resisting against it for the crime of being Jewish or whatever. But like, what's really interesting here is that like, there is no fucking resistance whatsoever to Trump 2 right now. It's really horrifying.
After 5 years of Nazi torture in a concentration camp, Littin committed suicide. In March 1933, in an effort to confine the enemies of the state, an old munitions plant on the outskirts of Munich became the first Nazi concentration camp. After targeting the communists, Hitler turned his attention toward his next enemy, the Jews. From that time on, virulent anti-Semitism dominated the philosophy of the fast-growing party throughout the 12-year Reich. Hitler's 25-point National Socialist Party stressed the importance of segregating Jews from Aryan society, and soon led to abrogating all of their legal, civil, and political rights. On April 7, 1933, Parliament established its first major law to curtail the rights of Jewish citizens, the law for the restoration of the professional civil service. According to the Aryan paragraph, Jews were legally excluded from civil service positions. On the same day, a law was imposed that prevented Jews from admission to the bar. This legal assault had devastating consequences for Jewish lawyers. For the most part, Aryan attorneys were pleased and few voiced any negative reaction to such violations of justice.
The history of Jewish lawyers in Nazi Germany really follows an arc from the unification of Germany in the 1870s through the Nazi era. With the unification of Germany, Jewish lawyers for the first time were allowed to enter into the legal profession. And they flowed into the legal profession, and they became very prominent in the legal profession. When the Nazis came into power in the winter of 1933, they immediately tried to reverse the emancipation of Jews and the liberal legal order which had allowed Jews to become part of it and in which Jews had played such an important role. The Nazis round up its opponents. It arrested within several days 4,000 of its political opponents. Among them were Jewish lawyers. But at that point, the Nazis were arresting its political opponents, not Jews as Jews, not Jewish lawyers as Jewish lawyers. But within several weeks, it became clear that the Nazis were going to target Jewish lawyers as well. There were attacks on courthouses organized by SA thugs who would enter into the courthouses, or would throw out Jewish lawyers, would throw out Jewish judges. Violence served a purpose for the Nazis. They used it to its full extent. They used it quickly, and they scared people. But the Nazis also realized that violence had its limits, and that they could also use law in order to promote their agenda.
Hitler claimed that Nuremberg was the most German of cities, with a tradition that aligned itself with the nationalism of the 1930s. Known from medieval times as a city that burned Jews at the stake, Nuremberg continued to fuel animosity during the Third Reich. The city hosted the party rallies and also served as the venue for the...
Yes, not to freak you guys out, but delayed autistic Guppy is correct. Even in the 1933 German elections, a third of the electorate were either SPD, socialist, or KPD, communist voters, comparatively zero class consciousness in America in 2025. So the situation is worse. There is no, like, real revolutionary sentiment or class consciousness among the American working class, which is part of the reason why it's much easier for Donald Trump than it was for Adolf Hitler, even back then. That's why there is no fucking resistance whatsoever, and not even demands for resistance to specific erosions. When you ask me, like, Hasan, it seems like some of the deportation policies are very popular amongst the Americans. This is part of the reason why.
Promulgation of the Nuremberg Laws. Hitler used the 1935 National Socialist Party Congress in Nuremberg to launch these infamous race laws. For Hitler, blood purity ensured the vitality of the 1,000-year Aryan Reich.
We're not here yet. So we haven't gotten here yet. And it won't happen in the exact same ways that it happened in Nazi Germany, where, like, racial purity and race laws. I don't think that that is, like, fascism requires an outgroup and the protection of an in-group. The outgroup is both simultaneously incredibly powerful and incredibly influential and is constantly dominating and making the in-group vulnerable, but it's also weak and parasitic. It doesn't necessarily have to be on the boundaries of ethnic identity or the boundaries of race either. It can be done on the boundaries of citizenship in the way that this administration is working on. It can be done on the boundaries of religion, but this time maybe not Jews, but instead Muslims. Like, understand that not everything is like a one-to-one. But what is important here is to recognize that there's a restructuring of pre-existing laws and the utilization of the existing institutions to suit your purpose. This is why we always say legality is no substitute for morality, that under in the South, under the Confederacy, before then, slavery was legal. Abolishing slavery was illegal. Freeing slaves was illegal. In Nazi Germany, after these race laws, you will see a whole bunch of insane things are considered legal, and a whole bunch of normal things that you would expect people to do, like sheltering Jews, for example, is considered illegal. So make no mistake, the new precedent-setting decisions that this administration is making is in a way utilizing the pre-existing system to change the court structure to one that suits their purpose. That is precisely the reason why I think these actions against the immigrant enforcement actions that this administration is taking are incredibly scary, because once the new precedent is set, then they can use the law to their benefit to say, well, this is criminal behavior. You're engaging in criminal behavior. You're sheltering an undocumented migrant, for example, or you've said something that we consider to be harmful and in opposition to our agenda. You've vandalized the Tesla. You've said something mean about Trump. These are all now enforceable criminal actions.
As defined in the Nuremberg laws of September 15th, 1935.
Der Erde die Menschen nährt und aus der Fruchtbarkeit seiner Familien die Nation Ort erhält.
Hitler used the 1935 National Socialist Party Congress in Nuremberg to launch these infamous race laws.
By the way, if you are a student of American history, you might notice something very similar that you have probably learned about. And that is because Adolf Hitler ripped this shit from the United States of America, as a matter of fact. Straight up. The one-drop rule, blood quantum shit, all of that comes from us. He stole it from us. Straight up fucking bar for bar copy from the Jim Crow apartheid structure. Just so you understand.
In this way, the government revoked Reich citizenship for Jews and prohibited Jews from marrying or having sexual relations with individuals of German or related blood.
These Nuremberg laws, they were the ones that really prescribed citizenship for Jews. Citizenship was something that would be granted, like a license. Only citizens had rights of citizenship. The second law was about keeping the purity of race. And it begins by prohibiting any kind of marriage between an Aryan and a Jew. It spells it out. If there is already a marriage, it's invalid.
For the record, this literally exists in Israel too, which is kind of crazy. Like, Israel currently has this, where you can only lose your Israeli, like, first-class citizenship status as you can only downgrade. You can't upgrade. If you're Palestinian, if you're Muslim, you can't upgrade to, like, full-blown. Only under unique circumstances can you upgrade to a full-blown Israeli citizenship, and even in which case you won't be able to unless you're Jewish. It's technically not illegal for an Israeli Jew to marry a Palestinian living in the West Bank. They can do that. They just can't live together in Israel if they do that.
There were prescriptions, no kind of sexual relations. That was going to take a little bit of policing. And there was a provision that no non-German, Jewish or other.
Yeah, here. Israeli Knesset passes law barring Palestinian spouses. Israel's parliament on Thursday passed a law denying naturalization of Palestinians from the occupied West Bank or Gaza married to Israeli citizens, forcing thousands of Palestinian families to either emigrate or live apart. Hey, Hasan, I love how you haven't fallen off like everyone else. Thanks for that. I don't know what you mean by that. Who's fallen off? Like, that alone, that right there should be instantly. Like, if America were to pass a law such as that one, right? That right there is enough for people to be like, okay, this is fucking fascist. But when Israel has done it and has been doing it, no, most moral nation, moral democracy, they have to do that. Israeli rules say West Bank visitors must declare love interest. Foreigners must tell the Israeli Defense Ministry if they fall in love with a Palestinian in the occupied West Bank.
A female servant could be kept in the house of Aryans under 45. That was going to go into effect a little bit later. The bulk of the law went right into effect the next day.
Ist der Versuch der gesetzlichen Regelung eines Problems, das im Falle des abermaligen Scheiterns dann durch Gesetz zur endgültigen Lösung der nationalsozialistischen Partei übertragen werden müsste. Hinter allen drei Gesetzen steht die Partei und mit ihr und hinter ihr die deutsche Nation.
But yeah, going back to the citizen, non-citizen designation, this is why it is incredibly scary when you hear, I don't know, like Asmongold supporters and shit say stuff like, oh, well, non-citizens don't have due process. Non-citizens don't have rights. That is not true. That's wrong. And also, a violation of due process means you're fucking cooked regardless. That means your citizenship is up to whoever the enforcement is and how they feel at any given moment. Because if there's no due process, you can't defend yourself. You can't even prove your citizenship. So that means anyone and everyone is a non-citizen.
But with these laws, there was so much exclusion. Jews were really being excluded from public life. They had no rights.
It didn't matter whether you were a religious Jew or not to Hitler. If you had a quarter to an eighth of your background Jewish, you were Jewish. So it wasn't a religious thing. It was a racial, ethnic. And so if you had a Jew, even if you converted, you were still Jewish according to the racial laws, based on your background, based on your lineage. And so it was a eugenic and genetic and hereditary. And it was all caught up in social Darwinism, but it was a genetic, and that was a different kind of anti-Semitism.
For the record, the reason for this evolution is also because that's just how fascism is. It's there's an endless thirst for domination. It needs constant enemies, which is why it's inherently a suicidal ideology. There has to, look at all these, by the way, look at all these people giving their heart out. Yeah. Why is Hitler doing the Elon salute? I don't know. I guess he also was a big fan of car manufacturing, which he was. Henry Ford, he did like him. Henry Ford, another American vehicle, a titan of industry. Henry Ford revolutionized the assembly line. Henry Ford. Hitler loved that guy, and he loved Hitler back. Let me tell you. Henry also loved giving his heart out to people, just like Adolf Hitler is here. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's what they're doing. It's a secret handshake that autistic people love to do, I guess, according to the ADL.
Through legal machinations, the Jewish community was also forced out of the medical profession and denied civil rights.
Basically, starting out in 1933, it was made extraordinarily difficult, almost impossible, for Jews to...
Yeah, not letting Jews be doctors and lawyers is such a fucking self-own. Like, what an L. What a is an automatic personal L for you, big dog. Yeah, what's next? Comedians? Yeah. No more Jewish people in the field. In the legal field, no more Jewish doctors, no more Jewish accountants, and no more Jews in entertainment. There you go. Collapse your own entire economy. Key sectors gone. Ironically enough, we are currently doing that, by the way. What the fuck do you think it is when you personally start deporting every random PhD student with a fucking student visa? That's literally what we're doing right now. Every non-citizen, documented or undocumented, needs to be purged. They don't have the same rights. Okay, great. You've just cooked yourself. The brain drain is one of the most significant aspects of American dominance on the global stage. Good job cracking down on that, dumbass.
Practice either profession of law or the profession of medicine. They were essentially outlawed from those two professions. They were a major portion of those professions at the time. So, some people argue that this was an economic move, that the doctors and lawyers were happy to get rid of the Jewish doctors and lawyers. And that was part of it, but that's one reason it was supported so much, that no one really came out against it. But it was really a move to get rid of the Jews. It was a disgrace that the other doctors and lawyers didn't stand up for the Jewish doctors and lawyers, but I think that can be two reasons for that. One was they actually were fine. with the Nazi propaganda and racial hygiene, and really believed the Jews were infecting the national body of Germany. But economics was not irrelevant. It made those professions much scarcer, therefore they could charge more money, therefore they were more revered, so they had self-interest in that as well.
In the Nazi blueprint for a healthy society, those with disabilities had no place. A Berlin memorial today commemorates some 200,000 deemed not worthy of life by Hitler's manipulation of the law.
So the Nazis proposed racial laws beginning in 1933. That law was called the Law for the Prevention of Hereditarily
Holy fuck, my birthday,
Offspring.
but in 1933. I've never seen my birthday ever reflected in an important historical event. Shocking. Yeah. So what's really interesting about this part is that, like, racial purity politics unironically causes inbreeding, which will lead to a larger number of disabled offspring. But then they simultaneously are like, oh, you're disabled, we're going to kill you. It's insane. Again, death cult, suicide cult. Every part of this doesn't make sense.
Spring. Now, I think even the language, the wording of that law is important. You're not preventing diseases, you're preventing diseased offspring. And what that law recommended, based on the science of the day, was that people who were considered not to be contributing to the genetic health of the body of the Reich could be forcibly sterilized. And in fact, that law actually said 50,000 Germans a year ought to be sterilized, even if it was against their will, for the good of the Reich.
So many Elon supporters, even back then. That's crazy. This guy's got crazy motion, man. This guy's got motion for days.
Those racial laws were important because they codified what authors Hoke and Binding had suggested in 1920 in a book in which they coined this phrase, life unworthy of life.
It began with the sterilization programs of Germans, of the retarded and the mentally ill. And so the sterilization program, 1933, the sterilization law.
I'm sorry. It's not funny. That's crazy that he just said that. It's just like unexpected in a professional setting. It's like if you go to your OBGYN and he says, damn, your pussy looks great today. You know what I mean? It's just wild. It unexpectedly came out. I guess you can say it now, though. You know, Trump brought it back, baby. Comedy is legal now.
Which allowed compulsory sterilization for the feeble-minded, which was a catch-all for anybody you wanted to sterilize. But the sterilization program moved into the child euthanasia program. And the child euthanasia program moved into the adult euthanasia program. Doctors involved in all of this. There were genetic sterilization courts where two physicians and a lawyer sat on the sterilization court. One physician had to be an expert on eugenics or hereditary, and so they decided almost universally to allow sterilization. But after that, moved on to the euthanasia program, which is a misnomer, by the way. It was a murder. It wasn't euthanasia. These were not terminally ill people. It was just murder.
The strategy of Hitler's political regime was to undermine, dismantle, and decimate all ties to traditional religion. The government attempted to have the folk aspire to a single national Reich Church under Archbishop Ludwig Müller.
Lieber Herr Reichsbischof, im Namen unseres Führers Adolf Hitler und im Namen der ganzen deutschen Jugend.
Bishop Clemens von Galen risked his life by giving an anti-euthanasia sermon in Münster on August 3, 1941. Due to his strong protest, the euthanasia policy was scaled back.
In 1937, the relationship between the church and state in Germany had reached a point where there was great tension, specifically on the freedom of Catholic organizations, the arrest of Catholic clergy, and the situation of Catholic schools and religious education being taught in schools, and the future question of Catholic youth groups and ministry to youth. And with that, the German bishops were so concerned that they petitioned the Holy Father, the Pope, to do something about that, to try to protest. The result, with input from...
Not this specifically, but a version of this is ironically the Roller, the fucking first they came for the communists poem is about basically this. It's the erosion of all living standards slowly but surely. As you think that, like, well, the government won't come after me. They're just going after those other guys. Niemöller, who wasn't a Catholic himself, but he was initially a supporter.
From the German bishops, who was an encyclical, Mit brennender Sorge, with burning desire, with burning concern, stating that the German Catholic Church was under persecution and that the Reich government was in no way following what it promised to do in the Reich-Vatican Concordat agreement. That statement was actually read on Palm Sunday from the various pulpits throughout Germany. The Gestapo tried to confiscate any of the printed copies throughout. They allowed them to be printed, but then they confiscated them throughout the Reich. But the information and the protest was lodged, and it was heard very clear.
The Reich passed the law for the restoration of the professional civil service. And while this did not require the churches to employ only non-Jewish pastors, many in the churches, certainly not all, but many sought to implement that policy in the church. There were antagonistic policies on the part of the Reich towards the churches. So in 1937, the confessing church seminaries, which had been operating for a few years, were closed down. They were declared illegal, so they had to go underground to talk about the Bible, to train people for ministry and these sorts of things. Then in 1939, all of the confessional schools, both Protestant and Catholic, were closed throughout Germany. So there was a very antagonistic approach on the parts of the regime. So when we talk about the persecution of the Christian churches, and in particular the Protestant church, I think it's important to emphasize that the churches were rather aggressively pursued by...
This is precisely the reason why I think Jews who think they'll be spared from this fascist administration, because right now they're presenting their agenda as one protecting Israel and therefore protecting Jews, are fucking dumb. Like, obviously in the short term it doesn't matter, because, like, of course it's not going to happen like overnight. It's not going to happen even for a couple of years, you know, for sure. But I still think, at least looking at history, I still believe that there is no way that Jews are not in the crosshairs again. No fucking shot.
By the Nazis in the early years from 1933 to 1937. There were plenty of laws that were passed against them.
In the Third Reich, Jehovah's Witnesses faced a unique choice with regard to their faith.
And to see how they have grown, we have seen how he has as they made the truth their own.
Well, they behaved them like other traitors. For example, if women weren't prepared to work in the factories to construct weapons, they were sentenced to death. And that had been the same with men who weren't prepared to go to the army. They didn't have a particularly feeling against the belief system of Jehovah's Witnesses. They didn't know the system. They only had the notion that Jehovah's Witnesses didn't adore the system. They weren't prepared, for example, to do the Hitler greeting, to celebrate Hitler's birthday. It was a great day in National Socialist Germany. And
I'm sorry, but when a guy with this accent, historian or not, is talking about what the Nazis believed, it starts ringing alarm bells in my mind. Like, I know. I'm being bigoted. I'm being biased. Yes, everyone loves a Hitler birthday. It was a great day. I know that's not the case.
That was sufficient. That was it. And they were surprised how strong these small group of believers resisted them.
In the Third Reich, Jehovah's Witnesses faced a unique choice with regard to their faith.
Witnesses were offered to sign a paper to end their relationship with the organization, with the Watchtower Society, and then they could be free. But they didn't do that, and that's the difference to the situation of the Jews. The situation of the Jews, even if the assimilated Jews who didn't even know that their fathers and grandfathers had been Jews, hadn't any chance to flee the system because of their blood.
The Jews were the most persecuted for both religious and racial reasons. From October 1939, they were
Am I wrong? Like, I know he's not a bad dude. He's probably a liberal. Many Germans are. Most Germans are. But when I hear someone go, oh yeah, the Jews, even the assimilated ones will not be spared. I'm like, oh, okay. You know what it is? It's because of Hollywood, ironically enough. It's Hollywood. Hollywood has conditioned me into thinking that any German speaking in a German accent about the era is like, Brigadier General of the SS. Yeah, Hans Landa.
Relocated into large urban ghettos in Warsaw, Lwów, Lublin, and Krakow. To control these communities with a false sense of law and order, the Nazis established the Judenrat, a Jewish council within each ghetto. These forced liaisons between council members and Nazi overseers still remain a sensitive subject today.
Once you are in the ghetto, you basically in the camp to die. All the laws, Germans start with the legal things. They come to the country and they say Jews cannot have a property, Jews cannot have radios, Jews cannot have fur. I mean, all the occupation laws function before the ghetto. Once you are in the ghetto, it's just waiting for death. There's no more law in the ghetto. There are law, but there are Jewish law by Jewish Judenrat. Jews were already deprived of the basic things, and then creating of the Jewish district, of the ghetto, was the final German occupation.
By the way, this is Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, the ghettoization of Palestinian existence in the West Bank. It's as well. I watched a movie Come and See this winter for the first time. Holy shit! I want to watch it on. I want to watch it on the stream. A lot of modern German language was formed by the bad times, so they sound like that because the language in and of itself is modern.
Occupation law, which was based, of course, on a big lie, on a hypocrisy, that actually now, where Jews were already second-class citizens, and to protect them from anti-Semitism, from the conflict with the Christian population. Apparently, it will be better for them if the part of the city will be designated for them, so they can have their own governance. So my father, who was an engineer in woodworking construction, was working for the needs of the Jewish Council of Judenrat.
That is the most controversial question about the Shoah. It's about the Jews collaborating. Some say of their own will, some say that they've been forced to, but they were collaborating with the Nazis. Now, the big question is, which kind of collaboration was it? If it was voluntarily, then of course it's a terrible thing. But since we know that the totalitarian regime of the Nazis made people to do things that they would never do in otherwise. And in the concept of what Katzetnik, he was one of the inmates in Auschwitz, and then he became to be a writer and a witness in Eichmann trial, he called it another planet. So in this other planet that have its own rules, have its own language even, people acted differently because they were under a force, under a threat, and they had to manage somehow their own communities. They had to survive. That was always like that. That's how they survived.
The only controversy was a kind of ethical one, whether a Jewish person should help Germans to keep order. They were keeping order with the Jews under Germans' orders, obviously. Of course, the other solution would be not to have any community organization. It was absolutely a necessity.
On December 7th, 1941, Himmler reinforced Hitler's directive Nacht und Nebel, night and fog, a policy that summarily bypassed the law by relying upon special German courts to sentence suspects in occupied territories to concentration camps. They simply disappeared. In time of war, treason was punishable by death. As chief judge of the People's Court, Roland Freisler, the hanging judge, frequently chose to enforce the death penalty for many of those who stood before him pleading for justice. Between 1943 and 1945, the People's Court sentenced approximately 7,000 people to death. Maniacal in his tone and harsh in his judgments, Freisler oversaw two historical cases: the members of the White Rose and the conspirators of the July 20th.
Abi biri sana 3 hafta önce Türk düşmanı diye video yapmış. Öyle olduğunu düşünmüyorum çünkü her yerde söylüyorsun ben Türk'üm diye, seni takip ediyorum. Umarım en kısa zamanda Türkiye'ye gelirsin. Türkiye'ye gelemem maalesef ama Türk düşmanı değilim. Onu söyleyenler Erdoğan'ı sevmediğim için söylüyorlardır. Veyahut da onların partisi eğer faşistlerse veyahut da sağcılarsa onları sevmediğim için, onlara karşı olduğum için bana Türk düşmanı diyorlardır. Burada da bana da Amerika düşmanı da diyorlar. Herkesin düşmanıyım amına koyayım.
1944 assassination plot against Hitler.
It's crazy, mind-bending how all this applies to the situation in Gaza and West Bank. I think it's actually really interesting that we're watching this because the first half of this was the evolution of Donald Trump. And the second half of it is a much more accelerated, like the future of Donald Trump, right? And the future of Donald Trump is already in existence in Israel. If you look at fascism as a constantly evolving and obviously like a constant struggle to continue to manage power and to continue to eliminate an increasingly expansive out group, you realize that like the first half is America right now, and the second half is Israel right now, because I think that Germany, yes, and apartheid South Africa and Israel currently are examples of fascist projects that have played itself out. Obviously, with the case of Germany, it ended. Not that the ideology went away, but it ended, right, by force. South Africa, there was a major struggle, and ultimately it was, I mean, the inequality still persists, but it also ended, the legal structure ended. Israel, on the other hand, is a living, breathing, continuing example of a fascist apartheid administrative apparatus. Much to consider here about what to avoid. Because if we're like here, because like I said, we're in the race laws era, like where the courts and the pre-existing laws do not completely suit the purposes of this fascist administration. That is precisely the reason why. As it stands, there's still like a back and forth on the legal battles. That is where we're at right now in America. Israel already shed themselves of these issues a long time ago. So they have accelerated to the position that we're currently watching right now. You already are in the anti-intellectual era, though, censoring science? No, that actually is a one-to-one verbatim identical thing to Nazi Germany as well. The academic receivership, I talked about it. Remember when he was talking about like how Hitler went after lawyers that directly played a role in trials against him? Donald Trump is doing that right now. Law firms as well are being forced to concede to the Trump administration's agenda. That's already happening. In terms of the anti-intellectual thought, or rather the control over permissible intellectual thought, is already taking place as well. The federal government actively strong-armed Columbia, made an example out of Columbia so that other colleges would follow suit. This is one-to-one identical to what the Nazis did as well. For the Nazis, their entry point into academic receivership, which is exactly what the Trump administration literally is doing right now. They did it. Columbia allowed them to do it as of this past week. What they were doing in Nazi Germany against the Frankfurt School, or rather in all of academia, was to go after Jews. They were like, oh, if you're a Jewish professor, or if you have Jewish sympathies, socialist sympathies, you're done. You're out. Right? And just like in the United States of America with what Columbia did, the German schools at the time also capitulated to the Nazi government with hopes that they could maintain their funding. Exactly the same thing, like a one-to-one comparison, with the only exception being that this time the entry point is not Jews, but instead anti-Israel sentiment. Straight up, a demonstration of Palestinian sympathies. But the purpose there is not to simply squash any sort of pro-Palestinian dissent. The purpose there is much larger. It's complete and utter domination. It is to use the anti-Semitism task force as an entry point into eroding all the constitutional protections that are given to every citizen and non-citizen alike. Once they drop due process, and once they drop the non-citizens are not protected by due process or any laws whatsoever, then the crosshairs are on you. Because if you think that like not every single person that was put in concentration camps and killed were Jews, I hope people understand that. 15 million with the Roma population, with 6 million of it being Jews, but the remainder being disabled people, gay people. Not 15, is it? I thought it was 15 million total, 6 million of it being Jews. But political dissidents, socialists, communists, trade unionists alike. So understand that while we talk about the Holocaust from the perspective, Slavs, that too, for sure, any kind of resistance, 800,000 Germans resisted against Nazi Germany. Like, a lot of people, the reason why I'm mentioning this is not to like undermine the crosshairs placed upon Jews, right? The reason why I'm mentioning this is because Jews in Nazi Germany were a vulnerable population that you could draw a lot of public support if you dunked on them. In the same way that undocumented migrants in the United States of America right now are a vulnerable population. Or with respect to documented non-citizens, a great way to reset constitutional protections is by going after groups that, like, powerful organizations with institutional prominence have always wanted to go after. It's a way to open the door, because once you open that door, once you rewrite the precedent, you can use the courts to your advantage.
At the University of Munich, members of the White Rose Resistance produced 6 leaflets against the Third Reich. Hans and Sophie Scholl, along with their colleague Christoph Probst and their mentor Kurt Huber, were deeply committed to the high ideals of the White Rose movement. Condemned as...
I think what's really interesting about this is that right now, especially because we live in the aftermath of the Third Reich, we have an exact comparison to point to that virtually everyone understands as bad, right? And right now, if all of these institutions did start resisting against the Trump administration, there is an opportunity. There is an opportunity to cut this nonsense, or at least like actively undermine the initiatives that the administration is doing, because they do not have the manpower right now. They do not have the manpower and the logistics to be able to jail every single person. This is precisely why I try to agitate here and now, with the hopes that people will wake up to the fucking reality. And yet we are sleepwalking towards this future. That's what's so terrifying about this, is that this is perhaps one of the last instances where the complete collapse of American democracy and these institutions, even if it was always just in theory, this is genuinely the last moment before the fascist project is completed, which is why I'm extra angry at the Democrats in this moment for not recognizing that that is what's going on. People will say I'm being hyperbolic. I hope they're right. I hope I'm just simply exaggerating.
Conspirators against the government, they were sentenced to death for treason during wartime.
Große Firma! Na, die gehört aber zur schwarzen Fraktion. Ja, das sieht man nicht an. Das ist klar, das kann ja nicht anders sein.
Very charitable to think they don't recognize it? No, dude, come on. They don't. They don't recognize it. Even if they were alive in the 30s, they don't recognize it. Also, they weren't alive in the 30s. Come on. That would be someone who was alive in the 30s would have to be almost 100 years old. Like, what are you talking about? No, they do not recognize it. 100%. There are those who do. Make no mistake. There are those who do, and they actively champion it. Okay? That's why I say there are those who are goose-stepping towards fascism. There are those who are sheepdogging towards fascism, the Democratic Party, and the political apparatus that is supposed to be creating counter-narratives and resisting against this. And then there are those, the broad majority, that are sleepwalking towards fascism. Most people are in the third camp. They're just completely oblivious to this stuff. That's why it's not reflected in the polls, for example. And I think for them to recognize this, for the discontent to be reflected in the polls, you need to have leadership constantly making a big fuss. Yeah, liberals trying to preserve capitalism, taking the fascism pill.
Ja, ulkig. Wie wichtig wohl das Amt des Zivilanwalts da gewesen sein muss, das Sie gehabt haben, dass Sie nicht mal Anwalt, nicht mal Soldat geworden sind mit dem Alter. Und dann von da sind Sie dienstverpflichtet worden. Spricht ja auch für Ihre Haltung, dass Sie sich haben, dass Sie erst gewartet haben, bis man die Dienst verpflichtete. Feines Früchtchen.
They're cooking him. He waited until he was required to perform service, and he didn't didn't entertain it before he had to do service.
Früchtchen. Sie haben gewartet, bis man die Dienst verpflichtete. Na, wo sind Sie hingegangen?
If you go to the Vogelsang Monument here in Germany, you'll find in the museum a handout written by students that was a very critical about Hitler in a super clinical tone. Reading through this, pretty much every sentence would get you in trouble back then. It is crazy when you go through there and witness the fascist evolution, how many similarities you can draw to America now. Yeah.
Outside Stalingrad, the icy winter becomes a fiery hell.
Stories about the atrocities committed by the Nazis began to leak out of Europe, primarily in 1942 and 1943. We actually have documentation.
What happened? How did they leak out? How did people start realizing the severity of the atrocities? There was an army that started liberating the camps coming in from the eastern flank, you know? Yeah, they were in the group chat.
From the British in particular, in which British officials are already talking about death camps, places where Jews in particular were being murdered.
Bro, Americans are so fucking allergic, dude. I swear to God. Americans are so goddamn allergic.
Murdered by the hundreds of thousands by poison gas. You can find references to this in government documents from the British already in late 1942, early 1943. So there was a level of awareness already of the scale and the immensity of the crimes being perpetrated. Of course, in 1943 then, Battle of Stalingrad, early 43, Battle of Stalingrad is one of the major turning points. It really looks...
I guess it's technically in 1942. He's talking about like intelligence coming out.
From this point forward, after the defeat of the 6th Army,
I pulled the trigger
that
too fast.
Nazi Germany's days were numbered.
This was Kyle and Kessel with a vengeance. But the Nazis were getting Kesseled instead of the Russians. And on February the 2nd, 1943, after 162 days of the heaviest fighting in the history of warfare, the last shot was fired.
Yeah, am I crazy or did they not? This is 40 minutes of like talking about Nazi Germany with very little mention of like, this is the first time they talked about the USSR a little bit. Anyone in the chat saying W. Stalin is mentally ill? Really? You think he wasn't a W. Andy at this moment? This is like the biggest W of all time. The fuck? Yeah, no, man. I think liberating the concentration camps was a pretty big W moment for Stalin. And it's not just Stalin either. It was like it was a W for all of those who resisted the Nazi oppression. My dad's name is Stalin, like legal name. Is he Indian? Are you Indian? That's the only place I've heard, like, maybe, no, he's from Ghana. That's awesome. He's from Kerala. No, he's from Ghana.
Peace came to Stalingrad. In the shadow.
Homie had gulags, basically concentration camp. Brother, you live in the United States of America. What do you think slavery being totally legal as a method of punishment is? What the fuck do you think happens in American prisons, dude? It's the same shit. This isn't to say that like gulags are fine, okay? It's just that, you know, understand that just because we call it prisons and we called their structure gulag, doesn't change that it's like a different thing. It's the same fucking thing.
Battered streets, the blasted ruins, the ghastly evidence of their ordeal. The defenders of the city greet the rescuing army of the dawn. Stalingrad is free. the Nazis had capitulated.
General Eisenhower informs me.
Isn't there a difference how much due process is there? Listen, for the record, this isn't to say that like you didn't get sent to the fucking work camps for good reason. I'm not saying that at all. But we just uncovered an entire 40-minute documentary worth of this is how things are made legal. Like, you know, you can still have due process in the American prison system and still have it be utterly unjustifiable.
That the forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations. The flags of freedom fly all over Europe. For this victory, we join in offering our thanks to the Providence which has guided and sustained us through the dark days of adversity.
You see the Allies now beginning to think in terms of what they're going to do.
One of the most shocking stats of the Battle of Stalingrad is that more Soviets died in it than all Americans in all of World War II. If you count German plus civilian deaths, it was more dead than all of the U.S. deaths in all U.S. wars combined. Absolute carnage of a battle. Yeah, that's why I'm not going to fucking sit here and be like, oh my God, I can't believe you're saying W Stalin. It's like, yeah, dude, this was a fucking fat W, okay? Those people didn't die for no reason. It kind of feels like they did now because like Nazism and fascism as an ideology has made quite the fashionable return due to the dedication of the American administration instantly after World War II as well. But, you know, making a brutal fucking comeback here.
With the major war criminals, as they were called. These were the leadership, the leading figures of the Nazi government, Hitler, Goering, Goebbels, and so forth. How are they going to be treated? Churchill and his legal counselor, Lord John Simon, were of the view that the major war criminals were essentially outlaws who did not have to be given their day in court, but could in fact be taken, arrested, identified, of course, and then executed without the benefit of a trial.
These generals, 24 of them, who had covered themselves with such glory and such medals on the fields of Poland and Norway and France, they now had only their past glory to comfort.
Very clearly, the Soviets did not have in mind a trial or a proceeding along the lines of an Anglo-American litigated proceeding. They had in mind instead a show trial, not unlike the Stalinist show trials of the 1930s, in which Stalin was able to identify his alleged enemies, charge them with various imaginary crimes.
I think American historians should be barred from speaking on documentaries. I think it should be illegal. No, I'm done. You should just not, because this guy comes in and literally undermines everything, okay? He just came in and in like 3 fucking minutes, he's like, well, you know, the non-barbaric Anglo-American trials were totally better than the fucking sham trials that Stalin did towards who, by the way? His enemies. Show trials against his enemies, dude. No reactionary elements, no counter-revolutionary elements, no fucking fascists there, you know?
And secure their conviction and then have them executed in the 1930s. This is the proceeding which they wanted to impose upon the major war criminals. The Soviet foreign minister, Molotov, had already talked with the Allies on behalf of the Soviet government and tried to persuade them that the best way to deal with the major war criminals was by means of a special international tribunal. Stimson was of the view that a special international tribunal could be used in which the major war criminals would be prosecuted, but they would enjoy the same kinds of due process rights which any American accused of an offense would enjoy. The right to hear the charges against them, the right to study the indictment, the right to counsel, and the right to defend themselves in a fair proceeding.
Nuremberg remained a focal point for the National Socialist Party, hosting popular rallies and political congresses starting in 1927. It continued through the Nuremberg Laws of 1935, and again in November 1945.
Nazis got treated better than immigrants now, yes, but also That judge was talking about treatment of American Nazis who were offering material support to Nazi Germany. There were also like American ideological Nazis, not even like American Germans or whatever, but like ideologically Nazis who consistently worked with the Nazi government. Many such cases of American industry titans that maintained a lot of their industry in Nazi Germany.
The focus was on Nuremberg, as the city became the seat of the International Military Tribunal to address war crimes and crimes against humanity.
The drums of doom begin to beat for 24 top Nazis as Nuremberg becomes the scene of the War Crimes Tribunal.
Do you think Republicans will try and ban guns? No, dude. Why would they? First of all, there are more guns than there are people in this country. And a lot of them are in the hands of like arsenal owners, and virtually all, like if you look at gun ownership, ideologically, if you look at gun ownership, they're either libs or they're fucking already loyal servants. Like they will participate in the brown shirts militia movements, and some of them do. That's why I always laugh whenever motherfuckers say like, yo, America couldn't be overturned as easy because everyone's armed to the gills, you know? My Second Amendment is there to protect the First. It's like, okay, I don't see you using your Second Amendment right now, bitch. Fuck you mean to protect the First? Yeah, these guys they just wanted to have, you know, their toys. That's it. They're murder toys. It has nothing to do with like standing up against a tyrannical dictatorship. I don't see nobody standing up right now.
Among the ruins of this former shrine of Nazism, an ordinary jail houses its former big shots. Each has a solitary cell and is forbidden to talk during exercise. Under indictment are Arthur Sykes Inquart, former Gauleiter of Holland.
Yeah, the only time we've gotten like serious rollbacks with restrictions, gun regulations, is when black resistance groups, revolutionary black groups have participated in what they previously thought was their right to demonstrate with arms. You know, famously, the Reagan case comes to mind when the Black Panthers marched on the California Capitol with their arms. And then shortly after, they were like, yeah, you can't do that anymore, actually.
Striker, fanatical anti-Semite. Rudolf Hess, one-time adjutant of Hitler. And Hermann Goering.
Rudolf Hess, also known as the guy who is in White Lotus season 3. I can't get over that, dude. I can't get over the guy who fucking acted his goddamn face off in Zone of Interest is the German guy who's like the general manager of White Lotus season 3, the hotel in Thailand. No spoilers. Aha, it's not a spoiler. The fuck are you talking about? It's not a spoiler. He's in the first episode. What?
Chief U.S. Prosecutor at Nuremberg, Robert Jackson, stated in his diary that the court was charged with establishing a rule of law in the place where it had been said there would be no more law.
What is the advantage of conspiracy? It afforded the government, the Allied government, with the opportunity to charge the Nazis with a substantive offense as well as participation in a criminal organization, which meant that you did not necessarily have to show an individual criminal act committed by the defendant. What's interesting about conspiracy, again, is that it connects all of the individual charges against the Nazis. So in addition to charging with the Nazis with war crimes or with crimes against peace or crimes against humanity, they are also charged with conspiracy to commit crimes against peace, conspiracy to commit crimes against humanity, and conspiracy to commit war crimes. So a conspiracy, again, this notion of a criminal organization, the criminal plan to conquer the world, that was the foundation that underlay the entire case, especially on the American side.
One after another, the prosecutors came forward to state the case against the criminals. The first to speak was Robert Jackson.
In the prisoner's dock sit 20 odd, broken men, reproached by the humiliation of those they have led, almost as bitterly as by the desolation of those they have attacked. Their personal capacity for evil is forever past. It is hard now to perceive in these miserable men as captives the power by which, as Nazi leaders, they once dominated much of the world and terrified most of it. We will show them.
Oh, Rudolf Hess and Rudolf Hess. My mistake. They were talking about Rudolf Hess, Deputy Führer, who tried to make the peace with Britain. Sorry, I was wrong.
To be
About the different Rudolf.
Symbols of racial hatred, of terrorism and violence, and of the arrogance and cruelty of power.
The Allies really learned of Nazi war crimes when the Nazis embarked on aggressive war. The core theory of...
This is legalistic circle jerking. Yeah, left half of them get away because they were of value. You hung a few, and the remaining starting running orgs and other NGOs. All the same time, you would have North Korea where 2 million were killed. Vietnam and Laos up to 7 mil. 2 million in Algeria. Nobody cared about those European powers for doing what they did, let alone in Belgium and Congo, etc. The West will always be hypocrites. Yes. Yes. The power of white supremacist, Western supremacist attitude, Western chauvinism and white supremacy is an incredibly powerful glue that holds everything together. Whether people recognize it or not does not matter. Yeah, it's true. Western powers, I think, certainly did not feel too fearful of fascism and Nazis in general, considering how quickly they absorbed formative fascists and the remainders in all of Western Europe and started using them as a tool against the Soviets because they were terrified of the influence of socialism growing. I think sham trials and hyper paranoia aside, you should have sicked Stalin on the rest of the Nazi leadership. I think maybe that's just me. Sure, a little bit of a madman, but
the Nuremberg prosecution is that the aggressive war itself was a crime. It's an overarching theory of criminality, and then within the war...
Didn't help that Stalin was an authoritarian? What are you talking about? This has nothing to do with anything. Like, what are we talking about? We're acting like Western European leadership cares about fucking authoritarians, dude. Oh my God. Please stop. This is liberal nonsense, okay? It's fucking liberal nonsense. When has America not personally put their own authoritarian dictatorships in positions of power in other countries? It's a matter of ideology rather than a method of leadership. Yeah, they didn't give a fuck about that. How'd that happen? Why do you consistently advocate for Stalin? His actions, because we're talking about the one era where he's like categorically in the right. That's it. Like, that's it. This is the time frame where he is categorically correct. Okay, straight up. It's the same reason behind why I'm not going to give Churchill too much smoke either. Like, if we're talking about Gallipoli, that's a different subject matter. But if we're talking about World War II, acting like Churchill was not categorically correct is delusional. Yeah, he also implemented famines. You know, not a good dude in general. But if we're talking within the framework of World War II, he was on the right side. It's that simple. Like, I ride for the American government in World War II. Think about that. For easy company across the board. Those motherfuckers literally dropped 2 nukes on Japan, dude. They firebombed the shit out of Japan and then dropped 2 nukes. And then still to this day say, well, you know, it would have been much worse if we kept firebombing. You know, a lot more people would have died if we just kept firebombing. And so the nuke was the peaceful option. Like, that's crazy. You are like having that attitude is you're like talking to a maniac. Having said that, I still stand up and salute. You know what I mean? You watch Band of Brothers. If you watch Band of Brothers and you hear the fucking trumpets coming in, if you don't fucking stand up and salute, you are soulless. You know? Hell yeah, baby. Why do you always have to give in one? To give one of the liberals when you bring up Stalin is it's anti-intellectual and just bullshit, says salty Soviet. It's okay to recognize that the USSR was a living, breathing, existing socialist project. Okay? It's okay to recognize that. And it's okay to recognize that there were obviously issues as well. You can either analyze the material conditions that led to many issues, or I guess you can assume the liberal position, which is Stalin is a bad guy across the board. Stalin is a bad dude across the board. Why are you handing it to him? So in the process of me quite literally explaining to liberals why he was 100% worthy of the praise and W here, you're duking it out with me in a moment where if you are super pro Stalin unconditionally, I don't know if you are or not, you shouldn't be fucking yelling at me in this situation.
There are battlefield war crimes, but really
the
from the
USSR
time Germany went on the...
did not achieve socialism. Okay, dude. Oh my God. Oh my God. Nothing is socialism. Socialism is when I decided socialism. Yes, these were transitional socialist states, okay? Collectivization, taking an agrarian, potato-eating society to one that was able to fucking go up against the United States of America and beat them to space. Yeah, let's not analyze that. Let's not analyze that with the appropriate language. Like, that's crazy. That's an insane thing to say. It's also ahistorical. It was absolutely a transitional socialist state. It was a socialist project that existed and it failed. Okay? I think a lot of people delude themselves into thinking that these existing socialist nation states or transitional socialist states are supposed to be perfect, as though it's supposed to be politics is supposed to be conducted through hugs, kisses, and tickle parties. There's never been a moment. The entire purpose of politics is a constant struggle between different forces on resources, distribution of wealth, resources, power. Power is violence. Who gets to do it? Who gets to be the victim of it? That's it. There's never been a moment in history where violence in either structural forms or in individualized forms or in direct forms or state versus state violence, there's never been a moment where that has not existed. Utopia must immediately materialize when the proletariat takes power. If it doesn't, then it really wasn't socialism. Yeah. How can a state be socialist if the workers are poorer than in the USA? Dude, that's so funny. That's a really good take, man. Thank you. Yes, socialism is when everybody has burger. Okay, let me explain to you something, okay? When 20 million people are fucking eradicated and your villages, towns are all reduced to rubble, almost directly after you have had a successful revolution against only a couple decades post having a successful revolution against a czarist imperial power, okay, and you have a fucking peasant society in front of you that has to rapidly industrialize without the bounties of colonialism, without the bounties of chattel slavery, okay, there's gonna be fucking issues. You have to look at where a country was, or where, like, what the material conditions were before socialism, or at least a transitional socialist state, and where they arrived, okay? That's what you're supposed to do. This right here is pure Amerifat cope. That is precisely the same reason why pure Amerifat cope makes Americans think like, China, they're not a global competitor. Look at their GDP. Fucking, oh wait, even they might beat us on that metric soon too. Fuck, they're eating rats in China still. Please do not look at the internet where you can, or please do not hear out a Chinese person. No, they have tofu dregs. That's where all the houses are made out of tofu. They're falling apart. Any day now is going to collapse. I understand the reason for it, but I still wouldn't call it socialist, because then people today think we want the same. America is an unimaginably wealthier nation than the USSR ever was. Okay? America, with all of its endless bounty, is nowhere near. Let me take a breath and explain something to you. Okay? Remember what I just said about you're supposed to look at the material conditions before and after or during to see if society's improved or not. You also are supposed to look at the endless amount of wealth that a country has, its geopolitical condition, for example. When you look at America and the American project, if your metric of success is line goes up GDP, then yeah, America's fucking great. It's awesome. It's the best. But clearly, if you live in the United States of America, you understand that the situation is fucking dire for the average American citizen, especially considering that our metric for wealth and our metric for riches is not necessarily universalized, but rather it's relative. It's relative to those who have against those who have not. So in that process, the American project has been a ginormous failure. A incredible failure. Homeless people in the wealthiest nation on the planet, the wealthiest, most powerful nation that has perhaps ever existed, that is able to dominate the rest of the planet with 800 fucking military bases. And there are 600,000 people that have to sleep outside tonight. Like, what are you talking about? That's a fucking failure. That's the biggest L of all time. That's my issue. We delude ourselves into thinking. Like, oh, these other metrics of success that we have designed for ourselves showcase how wonderful, how amazing, how bountiful this project has been. Yeah, not for you, motherfucker. It's the same principle behind freedom. People will be like, oh, people are starving in Europe, or people are much poorer in Europe overall. Okay. Do you think you are freer than the average European who works less hours than you do, who doesn't have to fear medical bankruptcy, who gets to take time away from work for much longer than you? What's fucking freedom? What good is that freedom if the overall number is higher? Yeah. Who do you think lives in a freer society? You do, or Europeans do, when they don't have to, when they're free of the fear of gun violence in their schools? Yeah, Michael Parenti. In the 3 decades after the Bolshevik Revolution, the Soviets made industrial advances equal to what capitalism took a century to accomplish. This is objectively correct. You can say Michael Parenti is reductive, but this is true. The Soviets made industrial advances equal to what capitalism took a century to accomplish through slavery and imperialism, for the record. While feeding and schooling their children rather than working them 14 hours a day as capitalist industrialists did and still do in so many parts of the world. To remind the chat, the wealth distribution prior to the 1917 Russian Revolution was close to 99-1, as in the noble class held 99% of all wealth in Russia. The fact that the USSR modernized and became a legitimate competitor to the US is nothing short of a miracle. Exactly. Look, you know, it's fine. It's perfectly understandable to criticize Stalin, as is perfectly understandable to criticize every leader, both historical and in modern society. But to deny the unimaginable advancements that the USSR was able to accomplish, given its starting point, is psychotic. It's ahistorical. It's ridiculous. It's liberal cope. It's pure Western chauvinist liberal cope. And it's the exact same kind of liberal cope that makes many Americans deny the reality of China. It's just like, if you close your eyes to it and constantly envision that these are fucking scary, barbaric monsters that don't know what the fuck they're doing, maybe it'll become real one day. It's such an undeniable reality that even neoliberals like Ezra Klein recognize it. Ezra Klein in his book openly mentions China was able to lay down thousands of miles of high-speed rail in the time frame that California couldn't even put down 10 miles, dude. China was able to create a fucking complex network of high-speed rail all across this massive country. It's like almost the size of a goddamn continent in the same time frame that America couldn't even fucking put down a couple lines of high-speed rail. California also, exactly, is the 5th largest economy in the world, by the way. How the fuck? California as a state alone is the 5th largest economy in the world. Tell me how the fuck that's possible. Whoa there, you're flying off the handle. You don't need to overreact like that. What? I haven't said anything. Why do you never talk about the issues in China? A couple different reasons. One, I do, and you just don't see it. And you only see me talking about, you know, good shit that China is doing. Number two, there's already an endless faucet of anti-China content out there, starting off with like real existing and valid criticisms of the Chinese governance, all the way to completely made up shit. So the question I have to you is, you have all of that everywhere else. Why do you want that here too? And then, of course, the last point that I would make is that I'm not fucking Chinese, but I'm not. I'm simply white Chinese in my heart and soul. And as someone who is not Chinese, I do the pro-China propaganda that I do, because I want Americans to be like, why can't we have that? Why the fuck do they have that? Why can't we have that? Because that's what I want. I want this country to not resemble the more authoritarian and bad and repressive attitudes that the Chinese government has. And I want them to instead pick up on the good shit, even development, rapid urbanization, massive infrastructure projects, an infinitely more restrained foreign policy approach. That's what I want, because I'm an American and I want to change the American government. They expect you to talk about every new country's news when in reality you can't. Yeah. I want to hear you criticize China because you aren't coming from an ahistorical or Orientalist viewpoint and can be trusted to actually be fair to them. I have many times over. I just did just now when I said I don't want America to engage in social repression in the way that the Chinese government has historically. Like I in that moment, I even then brought that up. Let's continue with this
March
document.
In 1939 into Poland, there was Allied thinking, particularly American and British thinking, that this was illegal, it violated treaties, it was criminal.
Raphael Lemkin provided Jackson with the foundation for this international law, establishing a paradigm for prosecution of war.
How about you to go to China, man? Yeah, this is the thing. I want the American government to do, if we're going to do repression and black bagging operations, I don't want it to be against fucking random students who wrote like a newspaper article about Israel being bad and wrong. Okay. I want them to do that to like the Jack Ma's of America. Okay. Why the fuck can't we have that? You know? Yeah. Do a little bit of rehabilitation to the fucking billionaires for once. Jesus Christ.
Crimes. Based upon his research of the massacres of more than 1 million Armenians by the Ottoman Turks, Lemkin created the hybrid word genocide.
The very term genocide had only been coined a year before the Nuremberg trial started. It was coined in 1944 by Raphael Lemkin, who was a Polish-Jewish advisor to the U.S. War Department. That term genocide was already used as a descriptive term at Nuremberg, but it wasn't until the UN Convention of 1948 that genocide became recognized as its own independent crime in international law.
In an incremental way, expanding from Germany into the East and occupied nations, Nazi perpetration is a visible thing. What it adds up to, and extermination venture, is something that is, very barely understood, not just during the war years, but even as they're embarking on.
Why are these people such anti-German races? That's what I was thinking. In my mind, you know what's burned to the back of my mind? Chuck Schumer telling the New York Times on the Interview podcast how the UN is anti-Semitically considering what Israel is doing to be a genocide. That's what's burned into the back of my mind. So when I hear this, I'm thinking to myself, wow, these are a bunch of anti-German, anti-Volkish racists, I think. Wow, really, really erroneous claims here. Quite hyperbolic. Germany has real security concerns. Germany wanted to do living space for the real Germans. Like, I don't understand. And then they wanted to do security concerns. What? How anti-Aryan of them.
On prosecution. They're really almost sort of discovering what we would call the Holocaust as they're prosecuting it and getting evidence and realizing the enormity of what they're dealing with.
This would be a way of showing the superior political power, the superior moral power of a kind of a liberal democracy.
For the record, I also did show you guys that propaganda is not unique to Israel. Germany did that. Like, Nazis also said, oh, you guys don't want us to live. Like, you don't want us to have living space. You don't care about our security concerns because you're fucking anti-German. So nothing is new here. Fascists love recycling the same exact propaganda, if not the same exact terms.
democratic regime, right? So by not pursuing a purely political strategy with respect to the Nazis, but by giving them a fair trial, it was a way of saying, we're gonna give you the chance you never gave your enemies, and it's gonna show that we're stronger and that this is a better path for the future. So it was kind of, there was a moral argument for it, but there was also a very profound kind of political argument that this would be a more effective tool for preserving the peace going forward.
The Allies chose to take the moral high ground by providing fair trials. 22 high-ranking Nazi leaders were put on trial for crimes against humanity and crimes against the peace. The historic Nuremberg courtroom 600 is still used for trials today.
The Nazis committed astonishing.
It's just like this Lemkin guy, he seems to know a thing or two about genocide. Is there like an institute or something that kind of preserves his legacy? Oh, there's a Lemkin Institute. I wonder what. Oh, there's a Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention. I wonder what they have to say about Israel. Statement on why we called the Israeli attack on Gaza genocide by the Lemkin Institute from December 29th, 2023. Wow, a bunch of fucking anti-Semites at the Lemkin Institute of Genocide Prevention. Damn. That's crazy. What? No way. Yeah, more like the Hamas Institute. Freaking got them. European Jews also came to the test, or at the very least held grudges against Americans and their American Jewish counterparts because they felt that they didn't implore the American government to do more to save them, including the fact that America still had a quota immigration system. This morality argument is completely ahistorical. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I mean, we famously fucking turned over boats. Yeah. Chuck Schumer's like they were doing this anti-Semitically. NOA canceled a speech by former president of Doctors Without Borders because she was going to discuss the genocide in Gaza. A slide about the death toll in Gaza could be perceived as anti-Semitic. A couple slides in her presentation touched on the casualties in Gaza during the Israel-Hamas war, as well as the cuts at the USAID, United States Agency for International Development. Liu said she was told the slides about Gaza could be perceived as anti-Semitic, while the USAID section might be perceived as anti-governmental. Liu, who was already in New York when she got the call, offered to make edits to those slides, but then 3 hours later, after some deliberation, she said the university apologized and said she had to cancel. I was stunned. That's sick, man. No, definitely. If they suppress the truth even further, like, everyone is going to totally be on board, I think. Eventually, guys. I mean, look, don't learn anything from history.
Crimes that we're all very familiar with. Nuremberg was not.
And Lemkin's definition of genocide encompassed a lot more, but the US and Canada pushed to disregard parts of his definition because it would label their actions against the native groups as genocidal, because they are. I also do believe that the Korean War would be branded a genocide as well. Like what the American government, what the allied forces, the coalition forces did in Korea absolutely would be branded as a genocide if it wasn't America doing it.
Not in the first
100%.
order a Holocaust trial. It really was, as I mentioned, it was a trial about the launching of aggressive war.
Vietnam
but
too,
nonetheless, if you look back at Nuremberg, the prosecutors did a pretty impressive and a pretty responsible job of bringing the crimes that the Nazis had committed against the European Jews to the courtroom.
The extensive trials concerning Nazi criminality have continued into the 21st century, with attempts to balance both justice and mercy.
Then there are a series of Allied trials. The most famous of these are the so-called successor trials, also held in Nuremberg before an American military tribunal. These prosecuted functional elites from throughout Nazi society. So there was a trial for doctors, there were a trial for judges, there was a trial of the high command of the army, right? So a series of kind of trials of different elements of the Nazi elite. But there were also Allied military trials, Soviet, British, French, and American, of war criminals lower ranking, right? So the Americans held a trial at the Dachau concentration camp, or a series of trials at the Dachau concentration camp in which hundreds of Nazis were prosecuted. The British had their own trial program, as did the French. The Russians prosecuted about 30,000 Germans for war. Russian trials, how fair they were, you know, is anybody's guess, but given the level of Nazi criminality, I always say it's a little bit like shooting fish in a barrel. Even the Russians managed to find a lot of guilty people in that context.
As the Cold War broke out in the wake of an apocalyptic conflict, history had to be rewritten, reframing the Nuremberg trials within the context of victor's justice. Nuremberg still stands as a memorial to international justice, a reminder of the devastating consequences caused by unlawful manipulation of constitutional law for political and racial purposes. The criminal leaders of the Third Reich forced humanity.
This is what history class is like in American high school. Is crazy. Bro, they went out of their fucking way. They went out of their way to just like dookie on the Soviets. Like they either did not mention their presence at all, or when they did, they were like, yeah, they were too brutal to the Nazis. This is like fucked up. They have no care for the rule of law. Unlike us Anglos, you know, we are cut from a different cloth, you know? That's no wonder Americans fucking have no idea what the fuck happened. No wonder Americans have no idea. Wait, what? What happened during World War II is crazy. Or in the aftermath of World War II. No one, oh, God damn it. Our education is so messed up. It's so bad.